She tried to sue him for $50,000, but he had a secret that would expose her entire illegal empire. What she didn't know was he was her own. She tried to sue him for $50,000, but he had a secret that would expose her entire illegal empire. What she didn't know was he was her own. She tried to sue him for $50,000, but he had a secret that would expose her entire illegal empire. What she didn't know was he was her own. Imagine the shock. A police officer nearly arresting me for trespassing on my own cherished land. It was only my deed, waved like a flag of defiance, that stopped him. For months, a woman named Brenda Carmichael had held our tranquil lakeside community hostage. Her calls to law enforcement a constant threat to anyone who simply existed without her imperial decree. She'd even tried to extort $50,000 from me, fabricating police reports, and shamelessly attempting to bribe county officials to seize my family's inherited property. And the ultimate irony, she had no idea I actually owned the $800,000 mansion she was renting from me. I'll never forget that crisp morning on Lake Serenity. The scent of pine and morning mist hung heavy, a perfect peace shattered by the flashing blue lights of squad cars. Two cruisers crunched onto my gravel driveway, and there she stood, Brenda Carmichael herself, draped in a bright pink bathrobe on her mansion's deck, pointing at me as if I were some master criminal. What would you do if someone called the police on you for fishing on your own property? It's a question that burned in my mind. My name is Marcus, and just 3 years prior, I'd truly believed I'd found paradise. After 2 decades in military logistics and a soul-crushing divorce that felt like a legal tank ran me over, I inherited my grandfather's rustic cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota, a town of just over 3,000 souls, where the biggest scandal used to be Mrs. Henderson's mischievous cat swiping fish from docks. My cabin was a humble 1960s A-frame, sitting on 2 acres of pure, unadulterated heaven. Every sunrise brought the ethereal call of loons, echoing across the glass-still water. Stepping onto those ancient dockboards, worn smooth by 40 years of Minnesota's embrace, I'd inhale air so pure it made my lungs forget years of Army diesel fume. The very essence of my childhood memories lingered here. Old cedar, fresh pine, and that distinct, metallic scent of the lake at dawn. For 2 idyllic years, Lake Serenity truly lived up to its name. 47 properties dotted 8 miles of shoreline, a blend of hard-working locals and summer visitors, all bound by an unspoken code. Wave hello, lend a hand, and otherwise, mind your own damn business. Then, like a force of nature, Hurricane Brenda arrived. She purchased the lake's ultimate eyesore, an $800,000 monstrosity that looked like a suburban Dallas McMansion had crash-landed in the pristine Minnesota wilderness. Within her first week, she'd introduced herself to half the lake from her pontoon boat, always adorned in blindingly white capris and cardigans, bright enough to guide aircraft. On the surface, she was sickly sweet, like artificial sweetener, but her eyes, they were cold, like January lake ice. That fateful morning, I sat on my dock, my coffee a liquid embodiment of peace, when I heard the guttural rumble of an overpowered pontoon boat, tearing through the morning calm like a chainsaw through silk. Yoo-hoo! Hello there, neighbor. Brenda's voice sliced across the water, carrying all the warmth of a tax audit. She pulled up to my dock, a smile plastered on her face that would have made a used car salesman blush. I'm Brenda Carmichael from the executive estate across the way. Executive estate? Good grief. I'm here on official HOA business, she declared, dramatically pulling a manila folder from her bag as if revealing a game show prize. The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association has voted on updated aesthetic standards, and I'm afraid your rustic setup isn't meeting our community guideline. My coffee mug hit the wooden rail with a startling clang. What homeowners association? I demanded. Her plastic smile cracked, revealing a glint of teeth. The one that protects our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat has got to go. And frankly, your scattered fishing gear makes the whole area look like a bait shop exploded. My declining influence was a 1995 Lund, a boat that had caught more fish than her floating living room ever would. And that scattered fishing gear, my grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box older than she was. Lady, I said, my voice low, This property has been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there sure as hell won't be. The mask completely slipped. Her voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy? She gunned her pontoon engine like a criminal fleeing a scene, sending a massive wake that slammed into my dock, spilling my coffee. The acrid smell of burning gas and expensive perfume lingered, tainting the clean pine, making my stomach churn. As I watched her mansion's windows glinting like a predator's eyes in the sunrise, my old military instincts flared, the ones that had kept me alive through 3 deployments. This wasn't just a neighborly spat. This was war. And I had the chilling feeling I'd just been drafted. 3 days later, an envelope was taped to my front door, like a parking ticket from hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd seen since my ex-wife's divorce demands. Lake Serenity Homeowners Association violation notice, blazed in blood-red letters across expensive letterhead. Apparently, I owed $500 for failure to maintain dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to comply or face more fines and property lines. The document looked impressively official, with seals and legal-sounding jargon designed to induce panic. Too bad it was worthless. Most people wouldn't know that, but I did. Time for some reconnaissance. The Cedar Falls courthouse basement smelled of old leather and shattered dreams, dust motes dancing in fluorescent light, like tiny bureaucratic ghosts. My Army days taught me that the best intelligence comes from those who've been filing papers longer than you've been breathing. So I befriended Dolores, a 70-something county clerk. Another HOA victim, hun, she whispered, her arthritic hands trembling slightly as she pulled my property file. That Carmichael woman's been in here 6 times this month, asking about enforcement and lien authority. Between you and me, honey, she doesn't know a thing about property law. My deed was crystal clear, no covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority. But my logistics training kicked in. Always observe what the enemy is really doing while they distract you with paperwork theater. Brenda's Lake Serenity Homeowners Association did exist, incorporated 18 months prior, with precisely 12 members out of 47 lake properties. Legally, they had as much authority over my land as my neighbor's cat. But while cross-referencing ownership records, something screamed at my internal detector. Several lakefront properties had recently transferred to Carmichael Holdings, LLC. A quick online search confirmed the ugly truth. Our self-appointed HOA queen was running an unlicensed vacation rental empire, transforming quiet family cabins into raucous party houses for city tourists. The woman lecturing me about community standards was the one actively destroying them. My grandfather's words echoed, "Before you fight City Hall, know who runs the city." A truly wise man, he'd also taught me that most county records, property ownership business licenses, covenant restrictions are free and searchable online. It's amazing what you learn when you actually do your homework instead of just threatening people. Armed with this intelligence, I tested the community's pulse with some strategic social media. Facebook might be a brain cell graveyard, but it's also where neighbors reveal their true thoughts. My post was simple. Has anyone else received violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? Just asking for educational purposes. My phone exploded like a fireworks factory. 8 different residents messaged me privately, each with their own Brenda horror story. She'd been systematically terrorizing the lake, a legal intimidation tornado, threatening elderly widows over bird feeders and young families over mailbox colors. Janet, a retired librarian with organizational skills that would make the CIA weep, had documented everything in a 3-ring binder. Tom from the marina shared photos of Brenda's bounced checks and unpaid fuel bills. Even 90-year-old Florence chimed in with observations about unusual late-night activity at Brenda's supposed family rentals. I immediately created a private group chat, the Lake Serenity Truth Squad. If you're fighting crazy, why not embrace the comic book drama? That evening, an unrecognized number rang my phone. Brenda's voice oozed through the speaker like honey, mixed with industrial solvent. "Marcus, sweetie, I saw your adorable little Facebook post. You're making this unnecessarily difficult for yourself." "Just asking questions, Brenda," I replied, feigning innocence. Neighborly curiosity. "Oh, honey, you really don't want to go down this road with me." Her voice dropped to that chilling tone women use when they're about to obliterate your credit rating. "I have connections you couldn't imagine. and I will absolutely report you to the appropriate authorities for harassment and cyberbullying." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer imagined she had with local law enforcement. As dusk settled over the lake, I sat on my dock, the gentle lapping of waves against weathered wood, a soothing rhythm. The air still smelled of freedom and fish fry. The sunset painted everything in hues of gold, including the scattered homes of the Truth Squad members, now like fortress lights along the shoreline. Brenda had made a grave tactical error. She'd assumed everyone would cower like frightened civilians. Instead, she'd inadvertently united a community that had quietly minded its own business for decades. The scent of charcoal and honest conversation drifted across the water, mingling with the pine-scented evening air that still whispered home. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, we, the good guys, were winning. If Brenda thought code enforcement was her nuclear option, she clearly hadn't graduated to true bureaucratic weapons of mass destruction. That honor was reserved for what transpired at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning that began peacefully and went sideways faster than a greased pig at a county fair. I was savoring my morning coffee, that sacred first sip that makes you believe the world might just make sense, when the unmistakable crunch of police tires on gravel shattered the lake's calm. Blue lights strobed across my cabin walls like some twisted aurora borealis, and I could practically feel Brenda's smug satisfaction radiating from her mansion deck across the water. Two officers emerged from their cruiser, looking about as thrilled as mall security guards called to break up a senior citizen flash mob. The younger cop had that fresh-faced earnestness of someone who still believed every 911 call was a genuine emergency. His partner, a grizzled veteran with sergeant's stripes and the weary expression of a man who'd seen every flavor of human stupidity, clearly knew this was another waste of taxpayer money. "Marcus, we've received reports that you're trespassing on private property and made threatening statements toward a female resident." I invited them in for coffee. "Honestly, if you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well be civilized about it." The senior officer, Sergeant Peterson, gratefully accepted. He probably knew government coffee tasted like liquid regret mixed with budget cuts. "Sir, we have to respond to all calls," Peterson said, settling into my grandfather's old kitchen chair that groaned like a ship in a storm. "But between you and me, this complaint doesn't pass the smell test." That's when I unleashed my secret weapon, documentation. I presented security camera footage, property deeds, the complete timeline of Brenda's relentless harassment, and even Tom, the code enforcement officer's written statement about her attempted bribery. The Army taught me that paperwork wins wars, and this battle was about to become incredibly one-sided. Peterson reviewed the footage of my threatening behavior, which merely showed me helping elderly Florence load her fishing gear, while Brenda skulked behind her mansion windows like a suburban spy novel villain. The alleged trespassing occurred on a public access road that had been public since before Brenda was born, despite the shiny new private property signs she'd posted overnight, like some legal prank. "Ma'am," Peterson muttered, shaking his head at the footage, "either you're the world's most polite terrorist, or somebody's been yanking our chain." While the officers examined my evidence, my phone rang. Dave Morrison, a private investigator who moonlighted at the local tackle shop and looked like he could arm wrestle a bear, had finished the background check I'd commissioned. What he'd uncovered would make a soap opera writer weep with envy. Brenda Carmichael owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her previous community in Minneapolis. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. She'd been sued by that HOA and lost, explaining her intimate knowledge of legal intimidation tactics. More concerning, she owed money to everyone from contractors to credit card companies, consistently using legal threats to delay payments until creditors gave up. But here's where it got truly fascinating. Dave discovered Brenda's rental operation violated 3 different zoning ordinances, none of which required the business licenses she'd never bothered to obtain. The county had no record of her vacation rental business, meaning she'd been operating illegally while hypocritically lecturing everyone else about community standards. The True Squad had swelled to 15 lake residents, each with their own Brenda horror story. Tom at the marina revealed she owed $3,200 in dock fees and had threatened to sue him for discrimination when he demanded payment. The hardware store owner shared security footage of Brenda ordering supplies, then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming defective materials she'd never returned. The pattern was clear as lake water on a calm morning. Brenda used legal intimidation to avoid paying legitimate debts, hoping people would rather write off the loss than fight her in court. Peterson finished reviewing my documentation and shook his head like a man who just realized he'd been chasing unicorns. "Mr. Marcus," he said, "I strongly suggest you consider filing charges for filing false police reports. This lady's been using us as her personal enforcement arm, and that stops today." As the officer's tires crunched away on the gravel that now sounded like victory, I saw Brenda's silhouette vanish from her mansion window. The morning mist rose from the lake, carrying the clean scent of pine and possibility. My attorney, Arthur Petton, had scheduled a meeting for tomorrow, claiming he had news that would change everything. Something in his voice suggested Brenda's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she never saw coming. Loons called across the water, their haunting song mixing with the distant sounds of normal people, starting their day without threats or bribery. Arthur Petton, my grandfather's lawyer since before I was born, was now 78, but still dressed as if arguing before the Supreme Court. His office smelled of old leather and expensive cigars, law books stacked so high they threatened to bury unwary clients in centuries of legal precedent. "Marcus, you might want to sit down for this," Arthur said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, which had probably witnessed the signing of the Constitution. "I've been reviewing your grandfather's estate more carefully, and there's something we missed." He spread documents across his mahogany desk like a poker player, revealing a royal flush, property deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, all bearing signatures and dates I'd never seen. "When your grandfather died, you inherited more than just the cabin," Arthur continued, his voice adopting that careful tone lawyers use before dropping a bombshell. "In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust as a tax shelter. You now own a 60% controlling interest in a trust that holds 4 lakefront properties." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion currently occupied by Brenda Carmichael. The words hit me like a slap with a wet fish. I had been fighting my own tenant without even realizing it. For 3 years, Brenda had been paying rent to a property management company that deposited her payments into an account I never knew existed. The woman who'd terrorized me about property standards was literally putting money into my pocket every single month. Arthur pulled out a lease agreement thick enough to stop bullets. "Your grandfather was thorough. This lease includes clauses about peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties, prohibition of unlicensed business activities, and maintaining community harmony. Ms. Carmichael has violated approximately 14 different terms." The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. Brenda had been harassing her own landlord while falling behind on rent payments, operating illegal businesses, and systematically disturbing other tenants in the same property trust. "How far behind is she on rent?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 2 months, with late fees accumulating. The property management company was already preparing eviction proceedings, but they needed trust approval. That, by the way, was me. I stared at the documents, my mind racing through 3 years of deposited payments I'd attributed to some mysterious inheritance. Brenda's desperate behavior suddenly made perfect sense. She wasn't just facing harassment and zoning violations. She was about to lose the home base for her entire rental operation. "Arthur," I asked, "she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she?" His weathered face broke into a smile worthy of a courtroom victory photo. "Not unless she's considerably smarter than her recent behavior suggests." The strategic implications hit me like a tactical revelation. I could evict Brenda immediately for lease violations, but that felt like winning through technicality rather than justice. My grandfather always taught me that real power meant knowing when not to use it. "What would you recommend?" I asked. Arthur leaned back in his creaking chair. "Give her one final opportunity to make this right. Document everything. Offer mediation. Show you tried to resolve things reasonably. Courts appreciate landlords who exhaust diplomatic options before pulling the nuclear trigger. But if she escalates further," Arthur tapped the eviction notice he'd already prepared. 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. Clean, legal, and absolutely devastating to her financial house of cards. I walked out of Arthur's office, feeling like I'd been playing chess while everyone else thought we were playing checkers. The afternoon sun painted Main Street golden, and for the first time in months, I felt like the universe had a dark sense of humor. Brenda Carmichael, HOA dictator and vacation rental queen, had been paying her worst enemy to let her destroy his peace. Sometimes the best revenge is discovering you held all the cards from the very beginning. You know that feeling when you're assembling IKEA furniture and suddenly realize you've held the instruction manual upside down for 3 hours. That's exactly how I felt walking out of Arthur's office. Except instead of a wobbly bookshelf, I'd accidentally become the landlord of my own worst enemy. Time to build a case that would make Perry Mason weep with professional jealousy. Arthur became my strategic advisor, channeling decades of courtroom wisdom into what he called the nuclear option playbook. His office transformed into mission control, manila folders sprawling across every surface like legal kudzu. The man had been filing documents since Nixon was in diapers, approaching this case with the methodical precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Think of landlord-tenant law like coaching a football team, Arthur explained, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against yellow legal pads. You set clear rules, players follow them or they're benched permanently. No personal feelings, just consequences for documented violation. Dave Morrison, my private investigator who could probably track a ghost through a snowstorm, delivered his final report with the satisfied expression of a man who'd struck gold in someone else's backyard. Brenda owed $73,000 across multiple creditors, had tax liens pending on her previous Minneapolis property, and a credit score that made subprime mortgages look attractive. Here's something everyone should know, Dave said, sliding papers across Arthur's desk. You can search public records online for anyone's property liens, judgments, and tax issues in most counties. Knowledge is power in disputes, and most of this information costs nothing but time to find. Janet, the retired librarian turned intelligence analyst, organized the community documentation project with efficiency that would make the Pentagon weep with envy. Her 3-ring binder contains time-stamped photos, witness statements, and a cross-referenced index of Brenda's harassment incidents that read like a criminal psychology textbook. The marina owner provided receipts for unpaid bills and photocopies of bounced checks. Janet reported, adjusting reading glasses, that had seen more neighborhood drama than a soap opera writer's fever dreams. Local contractors shared identical stories about payment disputes, followed by legal threats. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez, tracking complaint patterns with the dedication of a bloodhound, offered guidance that straddled official procedure and friendly advice. Document everything, he emphasized, leaning against Arthur's filing cabinet. Courts want to see that reasonable people tried reasonable solutions before things escalated. The technical preparation felt like planning a military operation, if military operations involved elderly librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the downfall of vacation rental empire. I installed additional security cameras with audio recording capability. My property had become more surveilled than a federal courthouse. Security cameras with audio can legally record on your own property in most states, Arthur noted, checking local statutes in a book thick enough to stop small arms fire. Always verify local laws first. But documented evidence beats, she said. Every time. We developed what Arthur called the escalation protocol, a step-by-step plan that would give Brenda every opportunity to save face, while meticulously documenting her refusal to act reasonably. First, I'd approach her as a concerned neighbor, offering mediation through county community services. If she refused or escalated, we'd reveal the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. Janet researched Robert's Rules of Order like she was preparing for a Senate hearing, while Arthur prepared legal notice templates for every possible scenario. The man had contingency plans for his contingency plans, including backup strategies involving everything from zoning enforcement to potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. Always give someone a face-saving way out of conflict, Arthur advised, organizing documents with the precision of a medieval monk, illuminating manuscripts. Courts appreciate parties who attempted reasonable resolution, and juries hate bullies who refuse reasonable offers. The Truth Squad had evolved into a neighborhood watch program that would make the NSA proud. 15 Lake residents coordinated through our group chat, sharing real-time updates about Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. Tom at the marina agreed to document any future incidents, while local businesses committed to supporting our paper trail with their own harassment documentation. We even prepared media contacts in case the situation reached public interest levels. The local newspaper editor had already expressed curiosity about the lake dispute, especially after whispers of bribery and zoning violation. The community protection aspect felt like something out of a feel-good movie, except with more legal documentation and fewer musical numbers. Several elderly neighbors installed security cameras after Brenda's intimidation visits, while Truth Squad members began accompanying vulnerable residents during errands to prevent isolated confrontations. As I sat in Arthur's office that evening, surrounded by evidence folders and strategic planning documents, the scent of old law books mingling with Janet's homemade cookies and Dave's faint cigar smoke, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, I'd give Brenda one final chance to choose dignity over destruction. After that, the nuclear option was locked and loaded. If Brenda thought my growing community support was just neighborly chit-chat, she clearly hadn't been paying attention to the tactical situation developing around her. What happened next proved that desperate people make spectacularly stupid decisions, especially when cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage started subtly, my first warning that Brenda had graduated from amateur hour harassment to genuine criminal behavior. She'd been monitoring our Truth Squad activities through Facebook stalking that would make a teenage ex-girlfriend proud, creating fake profiles to gather intelligence and spread counter-narratives about my supposed instability. That Tuesday night, my security cameras caught something that made my military paranoia look like casual concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock like a suburban ninja mission gone wrong. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the truck's license plate was clearly visible under my new LED floodlights. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that would have ruined my day had I not learned to expect the worst from people wearing too much perfume and carrying legal threats. My fishing boat sat half submerged at the dock, a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision, not loose, not damaged, just gone. $2,800 in water damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been alive. The smell of lake water mixed with oil and gasoline created an aromatic cocktail that screamed insurance claim and criminal charges. But here's where Brenda's desperation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of evidence in the 21st century. My security cameras had captured everything in glorious high-definition detail, complete with audio of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while he worked. I filed the police report with the methodical precision of someone who'd been documenting harassment for months. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived within an hour, took one look at the video, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money circle the drain. "This crossed a line," Rodriguez stated, examining the deliberately removed drain plug. "Property damage is a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone put this in serious criminal territory." While I dealt with insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently having her own nervous breakdown across the lake. Truth Squad members reported increasingly erratic behavior that made her previous harassment seem like polite conversation. She'd started approaching elderly neighbors with the subtlety of a door-to-door cult recruiter, demanding they choose sides in what she called the lake war. Florence, bless her 90-year-old heart, told Brenda exactly where she could stick her loyalty demands, using language that would make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned Brenda from the fuel dock after she screamed at a teenage employee about conspiracy pricing and discrimination against successful businesswomen. The kid was making $8 an hour and probably couldn't spell conspiracy, much less orchestrate one against vacation rental queens. The grocery store incident became local legend within 24 hours. Brenda had a complete meltdown at the checkout line, accusing the cashier of overcharging and demanding to speak to corporate headquarters about systematic harassment of professional women. The manager, a patient woman who dealt with everything from coupon fraud to holiday shopping madness, asked Brenda to leave after she started filming other customers while shouting about witnesses to discrimination. But the true intelligence goldmine came from Janet's library research skills, which uncovered Brenda's residential history going back 8 years. The pattern was identical at every address: neighbor disputes escalating to harassment complaints, accusations of unstable and dangerous behavior directed at anyone who stood up to her, and eventual departure under circumstances suggesting legal pressure. Previous landlords described identical escalation patterns, ending in eviction proceedings. One Minneapolis property manager had documented a restraining order after Brenda threatened to destroy a neighbor who complained about her unlicensed dog breeding operation. Another apartment complex had security footage of her keying cars belonging to residents who'd reported noise violations. Meanwhile, My silent preparation intensified like a military operation approaching D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order documenting the property damage and harassment. We coordinated with the insurance investigator about potential fraud charges, since Brenda's handyman had conveniently developed amnesia about his late-night marina visits. The pressure was building from multiple directions. Online reviews for Brenda's vacation rentals started mentioning unstable management and neighborhood disputes, causing her booking rates to plummet faster than her credit score. The property management company received formal complaints about tenant behavior that violated community standards. County zoning enforcement began their formal investigation into unlicensed business operations, while local newspaper editors started asking uncomfortable questions about corruption allegations and harassment patterns. As I sat on my repaired dock that evening, listening to the gentle splash of waves against new bumpers and breathing air that smelled like victory mixed with pine, I realized Brenda had made one final tactical error. She'd turned criminal behavior into documented evidence that would destroy her in any court of law. When desperate people run out of legal options, they usually do one of two things: accept defeat gracefully, or double down on stupidity until they achieve legendary status. Brenda, being Brenda, chose door number 2 with the enthusiasm of a kamikaze pilot heading for an aircraft carrier. What happened next would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetically criminal. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had served Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, which made Brenda's approach as welcome as a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later testimony, she strode into his office that Tuesday morning, carrying a designer purse and the kind of confidence that comes from huffing your own supply of entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," Brenda announced, sliding an envelope across his desk as if buying state secrets instead of trying to bribe a small-town politician who probably made less than her monthly shoe budget. $5,000 cash for consulting services regarding the environmental hazard that was my property. She actually used air quotes while suggesting my grandfather's cabin should be condemned as a threat to lake water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to recognize corruption when it walked into his office wearing white capris and desperation perfume. He immediately reported the attempted bribery to the district attorney's office, triggering an investigation that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket dispute. But Brenda wasn't finished shopping her criminal services around town like some corruption door-to-door salesperson. She made similar approaches to the zoning inspector and even tried to bribe a sheriff's deputy with what she called a community safety donation for overlooking her minor business license oversights. The zoning inspector, a by-the-book guy named Carl who treated building codes like holy scripture, actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The recording quality was so clear you could hear Brenda's jewelry jingling as she counted out bills while explaining how Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez documented her bribery attempt in an official report that read like a criminal justice textbook example of how not to influence public officials. The woman had managed to turn a neighborhood dispute into a federal case faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with news about the Diaz investigation, his voice carried that special tone lawyers use when they're trying not to sound too satisfied about their client's vindication. "Marcus, she's facing potential prison time. Bribery of public officials is a felony that carries serious consequences." I felt conflicted in ways my military training hadn't prepared me for. I'd wanted justice, not to watch someone's life implode in real time. But Brenda had crossed lines that transformed neighbor disputes into criminal territory, and there was no putting that toothpaste back in the tube. The local newspaper editor, who'd been tracking the story with the persistence of a bloodhound, contacted me for an interview. "This has grown beyond neighborhood problems," she explained. "Public corruption allegations are legitimate news, and the community deserves to know what's happening." The media attention triggered Brenda's final public meltdown, which occurred at the boat launch in front of 27 witnesses, who probably thought they were just coming to launch their fishing boats, not watch a daytime television drama unfold. "This is all conspiracy," Brenda screamed, pointing at me with enough venom to kill small wildlife. "He's been stalking and terrorizing me for months. I demand he pay my legal fees and moving expenses." The accusation was so ridiculous that several witnesses actually laughed out loud. Florence, who'd been loading fishing gear with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to say exactly what she thought. Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, and you're the problem here. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and mind his own business while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist. The crowd nodded in agreement, a Greek chorus of common sense. Several people pulled out phones to record what was clearly social media gold. Brenda realized she'd lost all community support and stormed off, threatening to hire real lawyers with money she clearly didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to publicly reveal the landlord relationship at the next town council meeting. Time to end this before she hurts herself or someone else more seriously, he said, organizing documents with the precision of a man planning a courtroom victory. Her criminal behavior has forced your hand. Word spread through town faster than gossip at a church potluck. The county attorney would attend to observe potential witness testimony, while the regional newspaper sent a reporter after hearing about corruption investigations in small-town America. As I sat on my dock that night, listening to loons calling across water that reflected stars and possibility, I realized Brenda had accidentally given me something I'd never expected: the moral high ground in a community that refused to be intimidated. Tomorrow the truth would finally have its day in court, or at least in the high school gymnasium. If you've never seen 300 small-town residents pack into a high school gymnasium for what was supposed to be a routine town council meeting, you're missing out on democracy's greatest spectator sport. The energy felt like a championship basketball game crossed with a public execution, except the popcorn was homemade and the drama was absolutely real. Local businesses had closed early so owners could attend what everyone was calling the Great Lakes Showdown. The regional TV news crew set up cameras like they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials filled the back row with the grim satisfaction of people about to watch justice served with a side of public accountability. Brenda arrived fashionably late with her expensive Twin Cities lawyer, a slick-looking guy in a $1,000 suit who probably charged more per hour than most folks made in a week. She dressed for battle in a white power suit that screamed, "I'm important," while her nervous energy suggested she knew the walls were closing in faster than her credit payments. I approached the podium feeling calmer than I had in months, carrying a manila folder that contained enough documentation to sink a battleship. The gymnasium fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant growl of someone's stomach. Apparently, democracy makes people hungry. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, looking out at faces I'd learned to call neighbors over the past few months. 3 months ago, I thought I was dealing with a simple neighbor dispute. Tonight, I'd like to share what I've actually discovered. Arthur had prepared a presentation that would make corporate executives weep with envy. Property ownership documents projected onto the gymnasium's pull-down screen, in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The audience gasped in unison when the truth became clear. A sound like 300 people simultaneously realizing they'd been watching a magic trick performed in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Brenda Carmichael's landlord for the past 3 years without knowing it." The gymnasium erupted like a stadium after a game-winning touchdown. Applause, laughter, and more than a few shouts of, "I knew it," echoed off the basketball hoops, while Brenda's face cycled through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations played out like a greatest hits collection of tenant nightmares. Security camera footage of the boat's sabotage drew actual boos from the audience, while audio recordings of bribery attempts made the county attorney sit up straighter and start taking notes that looked suspiciously like arrest warrants. Brenda's lawyer attempted damage control with the desperation of someone trying to plug a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to protect community standards. The audience's laughter was so loud it probably registered on seismic equipment in neighboring counties. Florence, sitting in the front row with the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to speak truth to power, shouted, "Good faith, my ass," loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears and the newspaper reporter scribble frantically. Financial records showing unpaid bills and fraudulent business operations scrolled across the screen like a criminal psychology textbook, written in spreadsheet format. Local business owners openly discussed Brenda's creative payment avoidance strategies, while Tom from the marina held up photocopies of bounced checks like evidence in a fraud trial. That's when I delivered the line I'd been practicing in my bathroom mirror for 3 days. "Miss Carmichael, I offered you respect as a neighbor and reasonable discussion as a community member. You chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal behavior instead." I held up the official eviction notice, crisp, legal, and absolutely devastating. "As your landlord, I'm giving you 30 days notice to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully. The standing ovation lasted so long, I thought the fire marshal might issue noise violations. Florence led the applause like a conductor, directing the world's most enthusiastic orchestra, while several True Squad members wiped away tears that might have been joy, or relief, or both. Brenda stood up with the dramatic flair of someone who'd clearly been practicing courtroom scenes in her own bathroom mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at me with enough venom to poison a small lake. "He's bought off law enforcement and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez moved closer as Brenda's voice escalated beyond indoor conversation levels. Her lawyer physically restrained her from approaching the podium, probably saving her from additional criminal charges involving public disturbance and potential assault. The TV reporter interviewed me afterward with questions that felt like softballs pitched by a sympathetic grandmother. "What message do you have for other people dealing with HOA abuse?" she asked. "Document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies only win when good people stay silent." The next day's newspaper headline screamed, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme," and suddenly, our little neighborhood drama became a cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of reading your property deeds carefully. As the crowd dispersed that night, chattering like excited teenagers after a concert, I realized we'd accidentally created something beautiful, a community that refused to be intimidated by anyone, no matter how loudly they screamed about their importance. Brenda vanished from Lake Serenity faster than a bad check bounces, packing her designer luggage and wounded pride into a U-Haul headed for Florida within 14 days. She left behind a forwarding address that probably wouldn't last 6 months, and property damage that looked like a fraternity house after spring break. The criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Brenda accepted a plea deal for probation and 200 hours of community service, an ironic punishment for someone who'd spent months terrorizing her actual community. Her expensive lawyer probably charged more for the plea negotiation than most folks make in a year, but at least justice was served with a side of financial consequences. I never planned on becoming Cedar Falls' accidental community organizer, but apparently defending your fishing rights qualifies you for leadership positions you never wanted. The Lake Serenity Advisory Committee evolved naturally from our Truth Squad, establishing reasonable community standards without the fascist tendencies that plague traditional HOAs. We partnered with county environmental agencies on lake conservation, created a neighborhood watch program focused on actual crime instead of unauthorized bird feeders, and established mediation services for disputes that didn't require lawyers or criminal investigations. The real magic happened when I discovered how to invest 3 years of surprise rental income. The Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund started with a revolutionary concept: reward local kids who understood community service instead of community harassment. Every spring, we award scholarships to students pursuing environmental science, law, or public service careers. Our annual fundraiser has become Cedar Falls' premier social event, featuring fish fry that tastes like heaven, live bluegrass music, and storytelling contests where neighbors share "Remember Brenda" tales with the affection usually reserved for surviving natural disasters. Florence won last year's competition with her Oscar-worthy reenactment of telling Brenda exactly where to stick her loyalty demands, complete with gestures that made volunteer firefighters blush and inspired the Methodist minister's sermon about righteous anger serving divine justice. Personal healing arrived like a Minnesota spring, slowly, then suddenly, bringing life back to places I'd forgotten could bloom. The peace I'd originally sought came with unexpected bonuses: genuine friendships forged in the fires of community resistance, and neighbors who'd proven they'd stand together when bullies tried to divide them. Janet and I started dating around Christmas, bonding over a shared appreciation for proper documentation and her remarkable talent for organizing neighborhood revolution. Turns out librarians make excellent companions when they're not busy toppling vacation rental empires through superior research skills. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for public lake access areas, and teaching local kids how to create useful things instead of frivolous lawsuits. There's profound satisfaction in making something beautiful from raw materials, especially after months dealing with people who created chaos from pure entitlement. Our lake conservation project became a statewide model for community environmental stewardship. Weekend cleanup days remove invasive species, while elementary students monitor water quality and learn that protecting nature requires cooperation, not litigation. State agencies now showcase Lake Serenity as proof that communities accomplish remarkable things when they work together. 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner needs. First, research deed restrictions before buying property. Most HOA requirements are unenforceable fantasies created by people with law degrees from Google University. Second, public record searches reveal anyone's lanes, judgments, and business licenses through county websites for free. Knowledge trumps intimidation every time. Third, security cameras and documentation defeat harassment better than any lawyer. So invest in quality equipment and understand local recording laws. Media coverage transformed our neighborhood drama into inspiration for communities nationwide fighting HOA tyranny. I've appeared on property rights podcasts, spoken at municipal meetings about harassment prevention, and somehow became the unlikely champion for citizens refusing to surrender to bureaucratic bullying. Just last week, Janet mentioned her sister's battle with predatory towing companies targeting vulnerable drivers in Duluth. Same intimidation playbook, she said, showing documentation that triggered my well-developed bullying detection radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring morning coffee that tasted like victory and possibility. Dave Morrison's investigative services are still available. This morning, watching sunrise paint Lake Serenity golden while loons call across peaceful water, I hear my grandfather's wisdom echoing across time. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everybody. The smell of pine needles mixes with fresh coffee and the promise of another day in a community that learned to fight back against those who mistake authority for permission to abuse others. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, share your story in the comments below. Together we can help others fight these battles and win. And if you enjoyed watching justice triumph over entitlement with a healthy serving of poetic karma, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for HOA stories, where ordinary people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants destroy their peace. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA